The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it.
Well, that was the dramatic announcement that dominated the news this week. But is that even possible? Can the US take over the Gaza Strip? What does this mean from the Middle East? And that was just one of many dramatic stories from the United States. Also this week, Europe has taken several pretty important, significant steps towards militarizing. And is China overtaking the US technologically? We're going to look at all this and more on today's Trumpet World. Welcome to Trumpet World, our week in review Friday show where we assemble usually our four panelists. We're down one this week. We'll go into that a little more later, but we'll go over the most important news of the week from around the world from a biblical perspective. And this week, President Donald Trump's announcements on Gaza has absolutely dominated the news. And we've got a short montage we'll begin with to summarize the various things that he said.
Do something different. Just can't go back. If you go back, it's going to end up the same way it has for 100 years. They're living under fallen concrete that's very dangerous and very precarious. They instead can occupy all of a beautiful area with homes and safety, and they can live out their lives in peace and harmony instead of having to go back and do it again. The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it.
You are talking tonight about the United States taking over a sovereign territory. What authority would allow you to do that? Are you talking about a permanent occupation there?
As far as Gaza is concerned, we'll do what is necessary. If it's necessary, we'll do that. We're going to take over that piece, and we're going to develop it, create thousands and thousands of jobs, and it'll be something that the entire Middle East can be very proud of. But I do see a long-term ownership position, and I see it bringing great stability to that part of the Middle East and maybe the entire Middle East.
So that was Donald Trump's very dramatic press conference. So I'm joined by Mihailo Zekic, who watches the Middle East. Mihailo, this was so big, so dramatic, so kind of out there, it's hard to know where to begin. Perhaps you could just start by outlining what has been proposed. I mean, we saw a few things from that clip there, and there is still a lot that we don't know. But what is Mr. Trump proposing?
Well, in a nutshell, he is proposing a mass relocation, deportation, whatever you want to call it, of the population of Gaza to a what he would term a safe third country for the United States and Israel implied to go in and develop or clear out all the bombed out husks of buildings, clear out the unexploded ordnances, the remaining military infrastructure that of Hamas that hasn't been destroyed yet, and basically turn it not what we saw pre-October 7th, not the congested high-rises, impoverished third world country, but what, in Trump's words, he called the Riviera of the Middle East. A lot of people have jumped into that and claimed that, oh, this is the real estate developer and I'm talking, he just wants to turn it into Mar-a-Lago or whatever. And, I mean, maybe this is something to do with what he's thinking. But either way, that is basically, in a nutshell, what he's planning. As you mentioned, there is a lot we don't know. There is a lot of words that Mr. Trump and the U.S. government have contradicted themselves with. Lots of things they're not saying. Lots of.
Well, we probably don't need to spend much time talking about what we don't know, because we don't know it. But I think, first of all, I mean, it is very clear that he's proposing a big dramatic change in how we do Middle East peace deals, and lots of people are saying, well, this is completely unfeasible, it's maybe morally wrong, this is ethnic cleansing, etc., etc. I think to start with what Donald Trump gets right, like, the two-state solution has been the default for decades, and that has been, this is how we do peace. And it has comprehensively failed. And I think any observer, no matter their political leanings, would say we are miles away from setting up an independent Palestinian state in the West Bank and Gaza And even if that were to somehow, like we were to somehow be in a position where you could do that tomorrow, they'd also go to war with Israel tomorrow. So like this is not a we've been kind of pushing this solution for years, and it's been a closed door for years, and it's not working for years. So I think something big, bold, different is needed, and I do admire that about Mr. Trump, about Elon Musk, that like they look at things that people have said this is impossible, it can't be done, and in some cases they do them. We'll chat with Andrew Miller in just a minute about some of the war on government waste, where I was kind of pretty skeptical that they'd actually accomplish much. Hopefully skeptical, but like they've been pretty impressive taking on that task. So because of that, I'm always pretty hesitant when Donald Trump puts forward an idea to say, well, no, that's impossible, it's unworkable, we can't do it. I mean, we've seen the experts say that. When he moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, people said, well, this is going to be World War III, you can't do that, it's terrible, and it wasn't. It was a great thing to do. But with that all said, I mean, the plan to move out 2 million Gazans, that is a tall order, isn't it?
It is, and even a lot of normal cheerleaders, you could say, for Mr. Trump in the right-wing media and the Jewish media are saying out loud, we have absolutely no way of knowing how he plans on doing this. And there's even questions on whether he means a permanent resettlement or just move them out of the way to get the construction work going and then bring them back in. I think Mr. Trump has been purposely ambiguous on a lot of these details.
Yeah, or said slightly different things at different times. Like on the relocation, I think he said, well, it will be we'll bring back people from all over the world. It will be an international area. Mm-hmm. But then there's some other times he's made it sound like the Palestinians would be returning.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Or even the U.S. military being in there. He said we're not ruling it out. And his press secretary, Carolyn Levitt, also said that's not going to happen. The question of how this is going to be funded is also a big question. I think the big, what a lot of analysts are inferring from this, and I think they're right, is that, okay, maybe not all of the details of what he's saying are actually what he intends on doing, but he's saying these provocative statements and plans, if for nothing else, to send a signal to the international community, including to the Arab world, that, like you were saying, everything we've been talking about so far, two-state solution, et cetera, it's not working, and this is your problem, and you guys are going to have to start pitching in with something different right now, and if you don't, then we're going to do something about it. It's similar to, say, like the tariffs against Canada and Mexico. Obviously, Mr. Trump still has a few grievances with trade imbalances, but the main issue was not, in this particular instance, was to get the fentanyl crisis solved up. It was starting a war of words, you could say, to get down to the compromise middle, which is actually what he wants in the first place.
So what you're saying is basically President Trump doesn't want to depopulate Gaza or move the Gazans somewhere else and create a Riviera. That this is his opening position. What is it, do you think, that he actually wants?
Well, I do think, like I mentioned, there's probably a lot of truth to what he wants. U.S. control, that's probably the most consistent aspect of the pitches he's been making. And also, there is also the question, of course, with the ceasefire that we've talked about on this program before, which technically is supposed to be between Hamas, which Hamas thinks means they're going to stay and put. Are they going to listen to Mr. Trump tell them, okay, now you can just pack up and we're going to turn your mosque into a beach resort? Probably not. But I think the other big issue that he wants to do, or he's hoping to get going with this process, is to get some of these international partners like Saudi Arabia that we keep hearing about all the time, the United Arab Emirates, European countries, to say, okay, we won't necessarily accept 2 million people being shifted across the border to Egypt, but we could come in and create an international administration. We could start a de-radicalization process together as an international community. We could start moving Gazans with ties to other countries, for example, over to Egypt. There's already a huge proportion of the population before the war that were able to go into Egypt, say, to work or etc. I think this is probably going towards that in some sense.
So you think this is an opening gambit? This is, where you go in and you say, I'll buy that car for 10,000 and really you'll settle for 15. Like it's your opening position. And you're saying that what he really wants is for other countries, be it Saudi Arabia or the European Union, to basically take control of Gaza and make sure that the Gazans don't attack Israel.
Exactly. We're already seeing him play this with Ukraine, to an example, saying that the Europeans are going to have to be the ones to patrol the border whenever a ceasefire happens. And he's done these kinds of stunts before, like, say, for example, with the border wall in his first administration, talking about making Mexico pay for it. As soon as he got elected into office, that pitch disappeared pretty fast. And he was still able to get a barrier at least partway built. Or North Korea and how he promised fire and fury when that rhetoric got him to shake Kim Jong-un's hand in Singapore. So I think this is another one of those examples.
Okay, I think that's a really interesting perspective. Going back to that original question, is it workable? Like, if there's a no, whether that he really wants this or not, or whether like he has to follow through with this opening position or not, is it feasible to move 2 million Gazans out?
No. This would be one of the largest mass forced migrations of people in such a concentrated area in such a short span of time in history. And even you could tell from, say, some of the things Mr. Trump's been saying. Say, originally he wanted Egypt and Jordan to take them. And then all of a sudden we started hearing rumors that they might even get sent to Somalia. I don't know how serious that is, but the fact that the story keeps changing, I think, shows that he and the people under him are still trying to work things out. And as I mentioned, Hamas still hasn't surrendered. This whole premise of the ceasefire deal that Trump brokered is that Israel does not go in, at least in the moment, and finish Hamas off. There's been disputed figures given as to how much they've been able to rebuild themselves, but you could tell from all the hostage videos being released of all these armed men in balaclava standing around proudly with their weapons that they are still a force. And I mean, they're a jihadist army. They don't think necessarily like normal armies would. What other country would have let happen to Gaza than Hamas did? If America comes in, they're going to get excited to become a martyr and stand down to the last man, and it's going to be another quagmire that President Trump has promised to get America out of in the Middle East. I think he knows that. So again, there's a lot of unknowns. We don't know exactly what he's thinking. I'm sure we'll hear more in the days to come, but at least the plan itself that he's pitching right now is very, very highly unlikely to succeed.
And you've also got Jordan that already has more Palestinians than it can cope with, that there's a Syria, like the idea of Palestinians rising up and overthrowing the Jordanian monarchy is not far-fetched. And so I think, America has a lot of levers to twist people's arms in the Middle East. Like Jordan, Egypt, especially, they get a lot of funding from the United States. But if you believe you might end up dead, like America threatening to cut off trade, to threatening arms set, there's only so much you can do for that. And so I think, Jordan in particular, very, very hard to get them to take in significant numbers of Palestinians. Egypt, much bigger population. Okay, maybe. That to me seems the more doable of the two. And then exactly as you say, the Palestinians in Gaza are not going to want to go willingly. So then you've got to go in and move them. So that is a pretty big ask. So that it seems unworkable as it is. You're saying that might even be the intent, that it was never intended to work. I think it's worth bringing in this other peace deal that we saw this week that got a lot less attention, but could also be massively significant. And that was Donald Trump opening the door to an Iranian peace deal.
Yes, he's nothing official as of yet. We'd have no formal announcement this is our policy, but he has been making statements, including on Truth Social, that he would like to get an Iranian nuclear agreement put forward. Some maybe longtime listeners of our program will be thinking, wait a minute, didn't he back out of it? Didn't he call it the worst deal ever made? The one that Barack Obama...
in the same press conference with Benjamin Netanyahu, he called it a terrible deal, worst deal, terrible... Yeah.
He did, and rightly so. But just because that particular deal was something that he didn't like, that doesn't mean he wants to escalate war with Iran. I mean, you could arguably say the biggest pitch he made for this election season is no more wars, like no more adventurism, no more Ukraine, no more this, no more that. And Iran right now, I mean, we just saw what happened with October 7th. Yes, maybe they're a little bit whipped right now. Maybe their gamble didn't pay off, but they're still a crazy jihadi theocracy. And Mr. Trump doesn't want a conflict with them, but also he doesn't want them to get a nuclear weapon either. So if he could forge something a bit more palatable than, say, what Barack Obama forged, that looks like that he can market to the American public, to the Israelis, and to the wider world, that this actually does stop Iran from getting a nuclear bomb, he might be able to get away with it. And you've said this in your morning brief before, that this might actually be part of the gambit of what we've seen, why we've seen Mr. Trump twist Prime Minister Netanyahu's arm to get the ceasefire deal going, and then everything going on in Gaza right now, that maybe Mr. Trump said that if you don't get in the way of me forming a nuclear deal with Iran, then we'll take care of Gaza. Which, in that case, it is a lot more for Israel to gain, far more for Israel to gain than, say, the JCPOA, Barack Obama's deal, or anything Joe Biden may have been working on. But it's still a pretty significant compromise if it means letting Iran keep doing what it's doing in every other aspect of its foreign policy aside from the nuclear program.
Yeah, and it feels like momentum has been quietly building even just during this week behind this Iranian nuclear deal. I mean, you mentioned he had his Truth Social post where he said we should start working on it immediately, have a big Middle Eastern celebration when it is signed and completed. God bless the Middle East. Talking about how it will help Iran peacefully grow and prosper.
Marco Rubio said things as well in that similar vein, which he's normally an Iran hawk. So the fact that his Secretary of State's saying it as well shows that this is most likely official government policy down the line.
And then Iran reciprocated. Reuters had an article, I think this was just yesterday, with Iran's foreign minister basically saying if the main concern is that Iran should not pursue nuclear weapons, this is achievable, not a complicated issue. The clerical establishment's will is to give diplomacy with Trump another chance. That's what so he's basically saying, yep, the supreme leader is happy to sit down and do a deal. And also he said, well, yeah, we don't agree with this idea of deporting Gazans, but we're not going to let that get in the way of talks. Mm-hmm. He said the issue and the path of Iran's nuclear agreement are two separate matters and should be pursued separately. And yet, Donald Trump doesn't want war. No one wants war. War with Iran, yeah, it would be hard. So it's easy to understand why he wants a peace deal and why a lot of people looking at this can be like, yeah, okay, great. We'll sit down and we'll talk about our differences and this is how we bring peace. But it's not how you bring peace. And this has just been a trap so often this is what they did with Barack Obama. It's like, okay, well, we'll make some statements about our nuclear deal and we'll agree to a bunch of things about the nuclear deal. And then that just gives Iran more resources, which they then use in October 7th attacks. In many ways, there's a direct dot-to-dot connection from the Iranian nuclear deal under Barack Obama to October 7th. And Hamas having the weapons and the tools and the funding to do that. And the Houthis having the weapons and the funding to shut down the Red Sea. And all of this happening. So you come to this agreement on an Iranian nuclear deal, but if you don't fundamentally change the character of the Iranian regime, if they are still, well, Israel's the great Satan and America's the little Satan, or is it the other way around? Other way around. Getting my Satans confused. It's an odd. Yeah, it's a deranged perspective that they have with the world. I mean, it is a deranged regime. Giving into them is. I mean, people make the appeasement. They make the appeasement campaign comparison all the time. You have an article making that we'll publish soon. I think we're just kind of updating it after we were right on the brink of publishing your article that talked about or comparing the peace deal the ceasefire deal that Donald Trump pushed through with Neville Chamberlain in Munich and appeasing Hitler, and then this kind of deal came out as well. The depopulate Gaza idea came out. So that needs some updating. But this point that you appease somebody that's fundamentally evil, whether it's Hitler or the Iranian, you're just giving them money to destroy you. And I think that's the danger here.
And I think the other big danger is that this time, compared to the Obama administration or the Biden administration, Israel would probably go along with it, because if it wants the United States to be on board with something going on in Gaza, which again would be a huge blessing for Israel that it hasn't had with some other deals pitched, then it would have to keep its mouth shut and not do anything to derail the nuclear negotiations, which is very much not the policy Benjamin Netanyahu had when Barack Obama was trying to push through his deal. And the very fact that the Israelis are making preparations, their defense minister, Israel Katz, has already given the IDF orders to get ready for a large depopulation. The very fact that they're preparing for something shows that whatever's going on, even if it's not fully hashed out yet, something is going to happen, and it's going to happen soon.
Actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I meant to get this clip in earlier. This is Benjamin Netanyahu on Fox News. He was responding to this deal.
This is the first good idea that I've heard. It's a remarkable idea, and I think it should be really pursued, examined, pursued, and done, because I think it will create a different future for everyone.
So he's pretty keen on it. So you could see then, and I think he would know, okay, maybe this doesn't happen, but something not quite as good for Israel, but still something that like happens. And yeah, that could be a carrot on the Iran deal. And I think the Iran deal, the ceasefire deal, it shows a flaw in Donald Trump's thinking when it comes to peace negotiations. And I think that is still a concern with the Gaza deal. Like that the Gaza deal is a big step up from the two-state solution. Like we've talked about its problems, but two-state solution is completely unworkable too. We could spend exactly the same amount of time going over why that's not going to work.
Gaza was the two-state solution, and look what happened.
Right. So it's not like this is any worse necessarily. In fact, I think it's better in quite a number of ways. But the fact that you see the approach that he took with the ceasefire, and then the approach that he's now taking with Iran, it does show a flaw with this thing. And as you've pointed out, well, this ceasefire deal, the Gaza deal, is probably going to evolve and change, and this is just an initial bargaining position. And it shows a flaw with the mind behind that. And so that does mean that no matter where we are right now, there are some problems. There are some things to be aware of. And Trumpet Editor-in-Chief Gerald Flurry had a powerful key of David recently, talking about the ceasefire deal before we saw this Gaza moving out deal. But this is what Mr. Flurry had to say about that.
But I'll tell you this, what Mr. Trump has done here is going to plague him from the very beginning to the end of his tenure in office. That is a fact. And you wait and see if it doesn't happen that way, unless there's a big change in what he's doing. He has disgraced Netanyahu, and it's just a catastrophe that it's hard to even describe.
So that was kind of catastrophic. Things might look different with this. I think Mr. Flurry did say, well, maybe there's like he could turn things around unless there's a big change. So we definitely want to there's a door open for repentance, but it betrays the same thinking. Like, okay, well, Hamas will give up their prisoners, will give in to what they want. With Iran, well, we'll do a deal. We'll give you some of the money, the weapon, the trade that you want. We'll lift sanctions, and you just lift your ceasefire deal. And I think so. There's some issues there, but I think just stepping back and kind of taking this big picture look, because like you say, there is still a lot of unknowns, and this might not even be what Donald Trump wants. Like you say, it might just be an opening bargaining position. We are on pretty firm ground when we can say this is not going to solve the Middle East peace process and bring peace to the Middle East. And a major part of the reason we know this is a lot of the thinking behind this. It kind of revolves around this idea that anything can be solved with money. And I think that's even there with his statements on Iran.
Somebody actually I was talking to recently said that Mr. Trump is treating American foreign policy like a business negotiation, which he would obviously have plenty of experience with, assuming that every other person on the other side of the table, they're just thinking about the bottom line, how much money they're going to make. And interestingly enough, you mentioned my article about Chamberlain. Mr. Chamberlain had a background in business too, and that might have had actually something to do with how he was dealing with Hitler. But ultimately, I mean, most of the world leaders he's dealing with aren't businessmen. Most of them don't necessarily think like him, and I don't think that's necessarily something that he's realized yet.
Right, so this is not about money. I mean, he talked about we'll make Iran prosperous and we'll have a wonderful... When Iran is prosperous, then we'll have peace in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. But it's not poverty that is causing Iran to attack Israel and Iran to attack its terrorist groups around the world. It's not poverty that is causing Hamas. Like I was doing some rough numbers. Between 2012 and 2020, Gaza received very roughly $10 billion in aid. Like, that's $5,000 a person. Like, they're getting a lot of money poured in there. If they wanted to live in peace and in nice homes, they could have done that already. But instead, whenever they get money and resources and USAID comes in and sets up factories, they use it to build, like the USAID comes in and sets up concrete factories, they use it to build tunnels to plan military attacks. And so fundamentally, that's not the issue. You won't bring peace by addressing material causes. Now, I think you can improve things. You move the Palestinians far enough away when it's going to be very hard for them to attack Israel. It won't bring peace. You look at, say, Israel building it would help a bit. You can see Israel building the separation wall, the barrier with the West Bank, and that has led to a drop-off in attacks by just making it harder for Palestinians to attack. So I'm not saying the situation can't be improved with money or with some wise decision-making, but it fundamentally won't bring peace. And Herbert W. Armstrong was called an unofficial ambassador for world peace. And he founded the World Tomorrow program, the Plain Truth, the predecessor of what we do here on Trumpet World, World Tomorrow being the predecessor of Mr. Flurry's Key of David program. And he would talk a lot about this, about the causes of peace and the solutions. And here's a clip from one of his World Tomorrow programs.
Think of the things that we have done. We have been able to send spacecraft to the very surface of Mars and send back photographs on the surface of Mars until we can have close-up photographs of the very surface of Mars sent right back here to the Earth. Think of the computer. Think of the marvelous machines and the things that technology has invented. Why, the progress that we have made is phenomenal. It's mind-boggling. But all of those things are in the physical and the material realm. Now, just think about this a moment. All of the great things we have done, all of the accomplishments are in the physical and the material realm. And yet our troubles and our problems and our evils are spiritual in nature, and we can't solve them. A man goes up and creeps around on the moon and comes back safely, and he can't get along with his own wife, can't get along with his children, and there is a divorce and his home breaks up. Oh, we can do great things, but we can't get along with one another. We can't get along within the home and the family. We can't get along with group. Nation can't get along with nation, and so we have wars and we have destruction. So that way of life is the way of getting. It is the way of taking. It is the way of competition and strife and rebellion against authority. It's the way of me, I love me, and I don't care about you. And that is the way that we have been living. That is the cause of every trouble we have. Our troubles, in other words, are spiritual, and we can't solve spiritual problems, but our great accomplishments are all in the materialistic realm, and there we have done some wonderful things.
So our problems, if you look at the peace in the Middle East, that's a spiritual problem. That's what Mr. Armstrong was saying there. It's not something fundamentally that we can address with money. And he is basing that off biblical truth. He's basing that off passages like 1 Corinthians 2 and verse 11 that gives us an amazing revealed truth. It tells us that man has a human spirit, a spirit in him. And with that human spirit, that passage tells us he can understand the things of man. That man can figure out all of these amazing things, like how to go to the moon, and computers, and how to build these reusable rockets that Elon Musk has gotten worked out that are just absolutely incredible. And man can do all of those things. But when it comes to how to get along with fellow man, that's a spiritual problem. It can't be solved with those same material techniques. It requires spiritual knowledge revealed by God in the Bible, and it requires the Holy Spirit. When it's a human man with a human spirit and another human man with the human spirit, how do they two get along? It's a spiritual issue. And it requires spiritual truth. And that's why Paul in Romans 3 in verse 17, and he's even referencing the book of Isaiah, he says, the way of peace they have not known. We don't know how to bring peace. And so throwing money at the problem won't bring peace. That approach will not work. And yeah, okay, like I said, things can be improved. You could improve on the two-state solution and still have something that's not going to bring peace, but fundamentally it's not going to solve this. And so we can know, well, building nice homes for Gazans is not going to bring peace in the Middle East. And the Bible gives us that critical spiritual dimension. It helps us understand this. But the Bible does more than that. It forecasts the future. In Matthew 24 and verse 3, the disciples asked Christ, well, what shall be the sign of your coming and of the end of the world? They're asking Jesus Christ about Bible prophecy. One of the titles for Christ that he's given in the Bible is that prophet. Jesus Christ was a prophet. If we're going to follow Jesus Christ, we need to be interested in prophecy and understand why Jesus Christ himself spoke about prophecy and talked about the future. And part of prophecy is cause and effect. You can make a prophecy. If you put your hand on the hot stove, you're going to get burnt. And God's laws shows the spiritual causes of our problems that we can't discover on our own. And prophecy is showing us, well, you do this, disobey that law, this is how you're going to get burned. But God does more than that. He wants to point us to him as a lawgiver, to help us look to him to solve our problems, to reveal the solutions to our problems that we can't discover and work out on our own. And one way that he does that is through prophecy. He tells us what is coming in great detail. He demonstrates his power. He demonstrates that his word, that the Bible is relevant to the here and now and to world events, and how his God family plan ultimately points us to the Father. And so he has a lot to say about the Middle East as well. It just even specifically beyond that more general principle of, well, man doesn't know the way of peace. He doesn't give us every twist and turn. His purpose in giving this prophecy isn't to take all uncertainty out of our lives. It's to build faith and develop faith. So he gives us some broad outlines of what is coming. And so, Mihailo, what, broadly speaking, are we looking for to happen from some of these peace deals in the Middle East?
Well, first off, I'd like to say I'm glad you started off with that, because the Bible doesn't just talk in general, anytime man tries to make a deal with man, it's going to fall apart. There's a lot of big specifics, and it's the Holy Land. It's Jerusalem. You would think if there's one place God would have something to say about the future, it would be around there. Just as an example, I could cite Zechariah 14, verse 1 references the day of the Lord, this time period, referenced in many different passages right before Christ returns. And then the second verse, he says what happens right before that. Quote, "For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and half of the city shall go forth into captivity," etc., etc. It's an easy point to gloss over, but this is what Mr. Fleury writes in his booklet, Jerusalem and Prophecy. Quote, "The nation of Israel was established in 1948. At that time, the Jews had only roughly one half of Jerusalem. The Arabs had East Jerusalem. Zechariah 14 is also a prophecy that the Jews would conquer all Jerusalem, because in order for half the city to be taken just before Christ returns, the whole city must be controlled by the Jews just before that time. The Jews did take full control in the 1967 war," end quote.
So Zechariah 14, it tells us there's an implied prophecy that Israel would control Jerusalem,
yes,
because they lose half of it.
Yes.
So that's a specific prophecy. But we also, the Bible tells us what's going to happen with peace deals,
yes,
going forwards as well.
Indeed. And that ties into what I mentioned. Mr. Fleury goes into a bit more detail about how the Palestinians are going to cause this. But these are specifics, and here's another specific that he could tie in with these events. In Hosea 5 and verse 13, it speaks of Judah, the ancestral patriarch, and of the Jews in the Middle East, and it reads, quote, "When Ephraim saw his sickness and Judah saw his wound, Then went Ephraim to the Assyrian and sent to King Jareb. Yet could he not heal you, nor cure you of your wound, end quote. And Jerusalem prophecy elaborates a bit more about how it talks about Judah going to the Assyrian, and you have to know a few of these, who these people are in this modern day to make sense of it. Ephraim would be a reference to England, and Assyria would be a reference to Germany. We have plenty of literature on our website that could cover that. But if you look at that word wound, this has everything to do with what we're seeing right now in Gaza, what we're seeing in the Middle East in general, and with some of these other prophecies, even like in Zechariah. If you look at Strong's Concordance, for example, or Gesenius' Hebrew Kali Lexicon, they define that word wound as a remedy. And in Jerusalem Prophecy, Mr. Fleury writes one profound sentence, and in other words, the remedy is the wound. And he tied that into the peace pact with the Arabs. In other words, a wound that no matter how many times you try to fix it, it just keeps getting worse and worse.
So there's a prophecy there that Israel would see that the peace process is a mistake, that the peace process would prove to be a wound. And I mean, we have to move on to America, so we're giving you the very, very briefest overview. You know, a book you mentioned, Jerusalem and Prophecy, that's going to go into that in a whole lot more detail. But we'll just mention now that, yeah, this wound refers to this peace process, and you can prove this for yourself. So Israel is going to see that this is a mistake. And I think they're seeing more and more of that already, and they're going to see that they're going to see that these peace processes have been a curse.
Indeed, and you're even seeing, well, we talked about this last week, that Germany is going to be manning the border guards over there. You're literally seeing Judah seeing the wound and asking Assyria to come in a small way at this point to patch things up. You could expect this trend to be magnified very much soon. Whatever happens with Gaza, whatever happens with Mr. Trump's peace plan, you can expect this to be the general overall trend. But you're seeing it right now, these trends we've been talking about for years, and they're right in front of you.
So any other, I mean, I mentioned Jerusalem in Prophecy. Is that the best place to look for more information? Did you have anything else you were?
I would also recommend our Trends article, Why the Trumpet Watches Germany Allying with Arab Nations, to give a more perspective of why we expect Germany to come into it. Goes into a few other related prophecies as well for that as well.
So we'll put a link to that in the show notes to both of those. But we're looking for Israel to see that its peace process has been a mistake. God tells us specifically that it's going to do that. We're looking for Europe to get more involved in the Middle East to deal with that. Some of the other stories less noticed in the Middle East revolves around a country that we've pointed to Europe working with specifically and in particular, and that is Syria. And it's been a busy week for Syria's de facto, or he's declared himself
interim president.
So
President.
it's been a busy week for Syria's temporary president.
Indeed, Ahmed al-Shara, aka the leader of HTS Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, this al-Qaeda affiliate that, if anybody's been paying attention to the news for the last 2 months, would know that has taken over Syria, has kicked out the Assad regime, and is now the new rulers in Syria. He's had a bit of a flurry of activity reaching out to foreign leaders this week. On Sunday, he flew to Riyadh for his first foreign trip to Saudi Arabia, where the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, really the leader of the country, came and welcomed him. The new Syrian flag was flying there. They've updated the flag, so it's basically Saudi Arabia recognizing that you're the new guy in charge now, and we recognize that. And also on Wednesday, Shara had a phone call with French President Emmanuel Macron, who apparently is the first Western or European leader that Shara has directly spoken to. Macron, for his part, he congratulated Shara for, quote, the country's liberation from the rule of the deposed President Bashar al-Assad, end quote. So this al-Qaeda affiliated group, as far as Macron is concerned, they're liberators.
Well, he invited them to France, didn't he?
He's inviting them to Paris, and he deliberately, specifically said he wants to talk about removing sanctions from Syria. Again, this is the leader of a Western democracy, nominally one of the pillars of the Western world order. An al-Qaeda group comes and takes over, not too dissimilar from what the Taliban did in Afghanistan. They were promising a lot of reforms. We all know what happened there. They definitely did not fulfill them. And even though Syria has the potential to be exactly the same thing, France is eager, moving very, very fast to put this new al-Qaeda regime into the world's mainstream.
And we have a whole lot. There's a whole lot specifically in the Bible that talks about Syria. Mr. Flurry had an article all the way back in 2012 based on that, saying how the Syrian crisis will end. It's going to end up in Europe's camp. And we've seen a lot of drama over the last few months in Syria. We've seen that prophecy fulfilled. And that was on the cover of our February Trumpet print edition, Syria's Fall, Another Key Prophecy Fulfilled. So you could go to that to get some more information about that. Now, President Trump talking about annexing Gaza, that wasn't the only big dramatic announcement this week. I think the US segment of this show is very quickly becoming, what did Donald Trump do this week, and how can you squeeze this in into the time remaining? Because he always puts out so much. And so to hear the latest, we'll turn to our US correspondent, Andrew Miller.
Yes, well, President Trump had quite a bit of success this week in his war against the U.S. deep state. As we mentioned earlier, he may end up struggling trying to put his business experience to use solving peace in the Middle East, although he cut a really brilliant business deal with America's bureaucracy this week that I think is really going to help shrink the size of all these sprawling executive agencies that have kind of taken over Washington. Together with Elon Musk, he'd come up with a plan that he said any of the 2.3 million bureaucrats in the U.S. government who would like to go on the vacation of a lifetime can take this deal to where if they resign now before yesterday, February 6th, he will continue to pay them for until September. So that's like several months, 6 or so months of paid vacation on the grounds that they never come back. And so 40,000 people ended up taking him up on that by deadline, which is about 2% of the 2.3 million bureaucrats who work in the U.S. government. So you do the math, and he's basically shrunk the size of America's bureaucracy by 2% in just a couple of weeks.
I mean, I'm doing the math quickly now. Assuming they're paid very roughly $50,000 a year, which is probably an underestimate for American bureaucrats, that's $2 billion a year saved off payroll costs going forwards.
Yes, yeah. So that's definitely I think that's the main reason Elon Musk was involved, is just trying to cut government costs. But then also, as I've pointed out in a couple articles before, I think the main reason President Trump wasn't more successful during his first term is that he's just never able to get control of this sprawling bureaucracy. When the Founding Fathers set up America, they intended Congress to make the laws, the president to enforce them, and the Supreme Court to mediate disputes. But for the past 100 years, we've had so many laws that Congress has just been keep delegating, like, well, we'll make a law that says keep the water clean, and then we'll establish an executive agency called the EPA that decides what that means. And so on that math, Americans actually have to obey 17 bureaucratic regulations for every law passed by Congress. And so from that standpoint, just aside from even the money, just the idea is that, like, yes, we elected a president to enforce the laws, but he's the head of an agency with 2.3 million employees, not counting military. There's another million or so if you count soldiers. But don't count military. It's about 2.3 million bureaucrats. And as we saw during the Russiagate scandal and these other scandals, is like a lot of these bureaucrats do what they want, regardless of who the people elect. And so if Donald Trump's going to get control of the U.S. government, it's kind of a similar thing like we say about the European Union getting cut down to 10 nations. They can't rule 27 nations, they got to cut it down to 10. The Constitution makes the president the head of the executive branch, but he's proven time and time over again that he just can't manage 2.3 million employees. And so you're trying to find ways to cut this down smaller. Trump started his term with an executive order with a hiring freeze, saying that if someone resigns we can't replace them. We just have to reallocate the reserves we have, the people we have. And so now that this hiring freeze is in place, him and Musk came up with this plan. They're like, oh, you can get like 6 months paid vacation if you quit now and never come back. And apparently like 2% of the government took him up on that. So I was just thinking that is a good example. It's like you mentioned earlier with Hamas. It's like they've got religious motivations. You can't necessarily bribe them. They're hard. You can't bribe them with a nice home. They've other things driving them. But apparently, in the case of at least 2% of the American deep state, they are very bribable. You offer them 6 months paid vacation, and Barack Obama's fundamental transformation of the United States all of a sudden doesn't sound nearly as appealing as that. They've taken him up on that and head out the door. And Elon Musk, there's still other plans. This was their first plan to just get 2% right off the top. Elon Musk, the way he's talking is that he's saying that he's like, well, when I took over Twitter, I had to fire 75% of the employees. And he's like, at this point, in order to balance the U.S. budget, you might have to do something similar here. So I don't know if he'll get all the way to 75%, but he's already gotten 2% down, and we're not very far into the administration. So with some good progress.
That would be a tall order, 75%. But it's not just getting rid of people. I think a lot of the news I've seen this week, it's revolved around USAID and a lot of the cuts there. I've just got a clip here. I think this is the Donald Trump's press secretary rattling off just some of what they've cut or some of the spending and where it was going from USAID.
California and North Carolina, who continue to be on our hearts, and the president and this administration are committed to ensuring that these individuals get the funding that they need. And I would just say a strong message to Democrats who are out there pretending to be outraged about the long list that this administration is cutting federal waste and funding, like $2 million for sex changes in Guatemala, $6 million to fund tourism in Egypt, $20 million on a new Sesame Street show in Iraq, $4.5 million to combat disinformation in Kazakhstan. I could go on, and I'm happy to provide this list to every single one of you. Democrats are outraged that the American people they want their taxpayers going to.
That's just some of the money. So they're starting to get control of more of this budget. I mean, what's been going on? I've seen a lot of headlines about USAID. I think in some ways that's made it a bit of a slightly harder one to get the handle of. Is that just now completely shut down?
Almost. USAID is the United States Agency for International Development. It's basically the agency in charge of giving foreign aid to different nations. It has about a $50 billion budget, so that's so $50 billion minus overhead is roughly the amount of money we're handing out to foreign nations. This week, Trump he did shut down the offices and place all the employees on temporary leave. So it is shut down now, not permanently. They are dissolving the department, so there will be no more United States Agency for International Development. But some of the offices are going to be absorbed by the State Department. So right now they've shut down the offices, they've laid off the employees. They're doing a comprehensive review over, is any of this money going to anything good? If it is, they're like, well, we'll let the State Department handle that. And so far, the nominee for the State Department, I think last I saw, I'd have to double check. He's like, I think he said there's maybe 1,400 of the USAID employees that he wants to hire into the State Department, which is probably roughly only like 20-something% of the USAID employees there. So Elon Musk's dream of slashing the government workforce 75% probably will happen, at least in the case of the USAID office. They're going to abolish the department and have them come into the State Department, which has really been long overdue. I saw one study, this is just shocking. This is a survey from 2019 where they kind of audited USAID, and they found that USAID spending found that 43% of the agency's award achieved half of their intended results. So you kind of got to think about this number. It said, but basically they're like less than half of the projects USAID funds achieve less than half of their intended results.
And
Which means more than half of the agencies they fund achieve like less than half. So it's basically it's like of that 50 billion we're spending, the majority of it is just bureaucratic waste or outright money laundering in some cases.
And in a lot of cases, even the intended result is kind of a bad thing. Like if you're trying to fund sex changes for minors in Guatemala or whatever it is, you're making people's lives worse if you are successful. So I think that is pretty terrible. I think one kind of side point that is interesting to watch, and this will tie in a little bit to what I want to talk about for Europe, is I think there are a handful of things that USA does that is good. And if the whole thing has to be shut down because of all of this corruption, I think that will harm the United States. So I think, for example, there's the Infrastructure Transaction Advisory Service that basically is designed to help countries not invite Chinese spies into their internet services. Like they go around and try to help countries not have Huawei and these companies owned by the Chinese Communist Party set up their critical infrastructure and the backbone of their networks. So if you have things like that going by the wayside, yeah, you're going to open the door for China. There are certain projects, I think, that will open the door for European influence if they go. Now, the way that USAID is at the moment is completely unsustainable. I think it has to be shut down. But you could see that hurting US power if some of those have to go too. But I'm curious. I want to put this to you, Andrew. We talked about Elon Musk and coming in and cutting down governments, and I'd say optimistic, but skeptical. Like, I hoped that it would be successful, but I was like, well, everyone comes, like every election, everyone says, I'm going to cut down government waste, and nobody manages it. Elon Musk and Donald Trump, it looks like they are actually managing it. Is it because they're extraordinarily competent and that they have been able to succeed where others have tried and failed? Or is it that others haven't actually wanted to do this? And that they've been lying when they say we want to get rid of all of this wastage?
I think it's probably more the second one, is that there's been a lot of politicians that saying, well, we want to get the waste, and then once they're on the inside and like in on some of the graft and other things, they are less willing to go through with this, because on the Doge X account, like its tagline is like the people voted for major reform. And so Elon Musk has been very transparent with what he's doing, but his big point is that like it's not just him and Trump being extraordinarily competent where they can just come in and like revamp the government, but it's like there is they promised to do these things during the campaign and they were elected. So it's like for the first time in a long time there's actually a public mandate where it seems that like the majority of the American people say they want their government to be more efficient. There might be some disagreements over what should be cut, but even Democrat, I think like even like some of the Democrat, like Elizabeth Warren and stuff, saying that like, yeah, we need to have more efficiency in government. So you even build a little bit of a bipartisan movement to start cutting down these things, and they've done a lot now. And these are, Musk finally owned up to this just a few weeks ago. That originally he was saying that like, oh, well, America's running a $1.8 trillion deficit, so we're going to cut $2 trillion from the budget, which makes sense. You would have a balanced budget then, maybe 100 billion or so surplus. He finally came out and admitted that he's like, well, the fact of the matter is U.S. discretionary spending is less than $2 trillion. So that means that like a lot of this is going to like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, programs Trump has promised not to cut. So without cuts to Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, things like that, even if you cut everything else the government does, military included, you wouldn't cut $2 trillion. So Elon Musk, he finally admitted, he said, okay, it's like the $2 trillion in cuts is probably not going to be possible. He's like, but if I ask for two, maybe I'll get one. Which still wouldn't solve the budget. So to actually solve America's budget deficit, Americans are eventually either going to have to agree to higher taxes or abolishing health care and Social Security. Something no one wants. No one wants higher taxes, and for some reason no one seems to want to abolish Social Security or Medicare. So that's just a mathematical reality. So without either higher taxes or abolishing those mandatory entitlement projects, cutting $2 trillion from the U.S. budget is going to be impossible, which means solving the deficit is going to be impossible without doing one of those two things. But hopefully, with like programs like this, you're going to at least have a deficit that's dramatically reduced from like the 1.8 trillion we have been running. And you do bring up a good point about like competence versus like them like not wanting to do this. Is it does take an exert of public will. So far, Musk he's trying to like cast a spotlight on programs no one wants, just legitimate waste. But to actually balance the budget is like so there are going to have to be. It can't just be Trump and Musk, but you actually have to continue to have the American people support this effort to like spend less than you make.
So, I mean, the fact that he's been able to do so much so fast shines a light at some of the corruption in previous regimes or administrations. The fact that you can cut so much and still not come close to the balancing the budget shows some dire things about the state of the U.S. economy. I mean, put this though in its overall biblical perspective for us.
Yeah, well, I think from what I've been talking about today, there's actually kind of two interrelated prophecies here. The first story I talk about just slashing bureaucracy, really factors into the prophecy our editor-in-chief has highlighted in Amos 7, verses 12 through 13. It's about an end-time Jeroboam figure who he's identified as Donald Trump, who leads a resurgence in America. And he is supported by a religious movement called the King's Chapel and a secular governmental movement called the King's Court. And in Mr. Fleury's article, Can President Trump Get Control of His Own Divided Government? He mentions that this secular movement, the King's Court, is a mixture of the Supreme Court primarily, but also these executive agencies. And saying that for Trump to really fulfill these Jeroboam prophecies, he needs to be the head of the executive branch of government. And so he needs to get control of his divided government. It's something he wasn't able to do during his first term because it was just too big. And so when you're looking at Trump getting 2% of these bureaucrats to quit their jobs in terms of vacation and just shrinking the deep state, he's really shrinking it down to the size where he can be the head of the executive branch of government, which is what the U.S. Founding Fathers intended, but also highlighting this prophecy that there's a King's Court that actually supports the president in the end time under the Jeroboam administration, and not this huge sprawling deep state that just does what they want. The spending issue is related because like firing deep state agents does reduce spending. Although the spending issue is definitely not as vital to the King's Court prophecy. I mean, you could have a King's Court that spent a bunch of money and then collapsed down the road. But is related to the blessings and cursings chapters of the Bible, Leviticus 26 and Deuteronomy 28, talking about if you rebel against God's laws, then strangers will lend to you and you won't lend to them. And so anyone who uses money knows that if other people lend to you and you don't lend to them, then you're in debt. And if you do that too long, you go bankrupt. And so this budget deficit is one of the curses that has come on America because they have rejected God's laws. That is a sign. It should be easy to tell that America's rejected God's laws. But if you couldn't tell that America's rejected God's laws, the fact that they have a budget deficit is one of the curses God said would come on a country that's rejected His laws. We have a big one, so we've rejected God's laws, His financial laws and other laws in a big way, and so on that end. Trump trying to reduce this spending is it is a positive development. It's a positive development where we still have a lot of work to go through. Just 2% of the civil service is not solving our budget deficit problems, but it is definitely progress in a good direction.
And it just gets back to cause and effect, like we've been talking about even from Mr. Armstrong. And now you mentioned prophecies in Amos, the book of Amos. Amos is writing in ancient Israel, but he's making these predictions about the future, about a wonderful time of prosperity that haven't happened yet. And so we can know that this book is prophetic and that there's a modern fulfillment of things he's writing there. And about when he's writing about an ancient King Jeroboam, well, there's a modern fulfillment of that. He's a type of a modern King Jeroboam. And we have our book, America Under Attack, that will take you through that and again allow you to prove that for yourself. And not to take our word for it. We really don't want you to take our word for what these prophecies mean. I mean, we're doing a week in review show. We're trying to kind of blitz through several stories. So we're not necessarily taking the time to prove everything comprehensively, but we have the books. We have this material that will enable you to do that. And we really want you to do that. We don't want you to believe us because we're saying this. Don't believe us. Believe your Bible. Prove that and prove these things from your Bible. And that book, America Under Attack, will help you do that. Well, Andrew, a quick rundown of some of the other news stories from America this week?
Yeah, well, I guess some more positive news for the United States is Donald Trump's trade wars with both Mexico and Canada are going well. I even saw a T-shirt the other day that said, "I survived the Great North American Trade War, February 3rd, 2025 to February 3rd, 2025. It was the world's shortest trade war, where Trump put a 25% tariff on both Canada and Mexico. And the leaders of both countries, they were in a big poker match trying to have everyone call their bluff. They were waiting for Trump to back down, and he didn't back down, and it came down to right at the clock. I think the tariffs might have even already started, where they both said, it's all right, well, you're obviously not bluffing, so we're going to back down. Mexico agreed to send 10,000 Mexican troops to the U.S. southern border to stop the illegal immigration crisis. Justin Trudeau agreed to 5 or 6 different things in order to really crack down on the fentanyl crisis. And so Donald Trump agreed to postpone the tariffs 30 days pending good behavior. If Mexico and Canada both do what they said they're going to do, then the tariffs are gone. And if they don't, then the Great North American Trade War will start again about 3.5 weeks from now. The other good news is that Panama, there's the other country Trump keeps talking about, has agreed to pull out of China's Belt and Road Initiative in an attempt to get Donald Trump to not actually take the Panama Canal back by force. There's someone in the U.S. government, I think it was the head of the State Department, announced yesterday that Panama had also agreed to let U.S. ships go through the canal toll-free. Now, I think the Panamanian government's come back out and said that they didn't actually say that. So there's some dispute between the two sides still as exactly what they said. But on the good side, it's Panama's definitely taking Trump's threat to take back the Panama Canal seriously and are asking, okay, what do we have to do to distance ourselves from China enough that we can actually keep the toll money? And so there may be, it would be good if America just got the Panama Canal back, period. But the more we can get Panama to distance itself from China, and work with the United States is another big win for the Trump administration. I think the only big setback for Trump this week is there's 2 federal judges came out and struck down his executive order getting rid of birthright citizenship. America is one of the countries on earth where if you're born here, you have citizenship, which has caused some problems recently in that like illegal immigrants will sneak across the border, have a baby here, the baby's a citizen, and then they claim that they can stay because they're a U.S. relative. Trump's trying to make it so that like, okay, well, if you're here legally and have a baby, the baby gets birthright citizenship. But if you're here illegally, that doesn't count. And I guess we'll see. That might be one of those issues that goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. But so far, I think that's the only one of his executive orders that have just been shot down right away. The rest of them seem to be going through with quite a bit of efficiency.
Yeah, I think that probably will end up going to the Supreme Court. Well, thank you for that, Andrew. I'll just give you a bit of a rundown of some of the European news this week. The most eye-catching, sadly, is this mass shooting in Sweden at an adult educational school. I guess it's for like special needs and foreign language adults. About 10 people were killed in a mass shooting there with a fully automatic firearm. I think it was Sweden's biggest ever mass shooting. So I mean, that is a tragic story that we're too familiar with in the United States, and you're seeing this now in other Western countries as well. And Trumpet Editor-in-Chief Gerald Flurry, he has an article, The Real Solution to Mass Shootings and Violence. We'll put a link to that in the show notes, and I think that will that has some excellent material on why you get these and the real solution to them. But I wanted to talk a bit about Europe's response to what you're seeing with the tariff war from the United States and some significant things going on there. I should have grabbed the clip. We've had a lot of clips for you today. I should have brought this one along as well, where Donald Trump said, okay, we're putting tariffs on Canada, we're putting tariffs on Mexico. As you heard, that trade war's over. But he said, EU, you're next. It's going to happen. We are going to put tariffs on there. So we've seen a few responses to that. One was European Commissioner Ursula von der Leyen on Wednesday. She talked about the need to deepen trade ties and find agreements with China. It was the second time in 2 weeks that she called for closer agreements with China. So she wants to work, as there's pressure from the United States, she's starting to think, well, instead of being aligned alongside the United States against China, maybe we should switch sides. We'll get together with China. And America's putting tariffs on China, and that trade war has kind of been building this week. Well, maybe Europe will join in and kind of go on to China's side. So I think bear that in mind. This story about the United States or Europe breaking its relationship with the United States. They're not so sure about this alliance with the United States, and they're thinking of turning against the United States. And I don't think like Donald Trump's tariffs are the root cause of this. I think Europe has been turning against the United States for years, and these tariffs are merely the thing that helps reveal a change in heart that has already happened. But there have been a number of other interesting talks about Europe rearming that could be very significant. So Ursula von der Leyen, she's also talking about changing Europe's spending rules, basically making it easier for Europe to borrow money so that they can spend it on their military. The German Air Force is opening a new coordination center for the Air Force so it can coordinate multiple air forces. So they're saying we want to work together as an air force. But then this is the story that caught my eye the most. We have this on our website. Arms manufacturer takes over German train factory. So I think this is significant in its own right, but I think it's a really, really interesting potential trend. So they have there's this train factory. There's about 700 employees at the train factory, and it was going to be shut down. They didn't have enough train manufacturing, things like that. So they're changing it. It's going to be a tank factory now. Or they're going to make components for Leopard 2 battle tanks. And I think there's a lot of potential here. Europe is rearming. Rheinmetall stock price is going through the roof as they're getting more and more orders, trying to create more and more ammunition factories. Like, they're building more and more arms factories. At the same time, VW is frantically trying to avoid closing down a VW factory for the first time in German history. You've got steel factories closing down. You've got a major crisis for German manufacturing, while Germany is urgently, and all of Europe, urgently demanding more local-made weapons. Well, here's the solution. And is this a template that we're going to see rolled out in more places? Okay, don't close down the VW factory. Let's make armored personnel carriers. And I am way not enough an expert in supply chain logistics to know how feasible and how quickly you can change those things around. I mean, they did mention, I think Bild said that only about 350 of Alstom's current 700 employees in this train factory is going to transfer to this tank manufacturing. But I think that's just a really, really fascinating template to watch, and something where you could quite easily see Germany's vast industrial wealth transformed into military power, and industrial capacity transformed into military power. And Herbert W. Armstrong talked a lot about this. Again, there are very specific prophecies in your Bible about the rise of a European superpower. And this is what Mr. Armstrong said about how quickly this is going to happen.
I want to tell you a little more about it, and that is the coming of the United States of Europe. Now, brethren, you've heard me mention that time and again, and I think that perhaps we don't realize what a pivotal thing that is in world history, and what it means to us especially. Well, I can tell you now that the whole world is soon going to be rocked with astonishment and amazement when they find that possibly within a year now, there is a new super nation, a new superpower, possibly greater than the Soviet Union or the United States, has gone together in Europe. The prophesied resurrection of the so-called medieval Holy Roman Empire, the United States of Europe.
Now, you know, that was in I think it was the 1980s, and he said possibly within a year. You know, it didn't happen within a year. What I thought was interesting, he spent a lot of time in that message talking, though, about why it's taking so long, why it hasn't happened sooner. This is what he had to say about that.
But now, why the delay? I have known for years, and you've heard me proclaim again and again and again that the United States of Europe is coming. They're going to unite 10 nations in Europe. And the Vatican will be on top of the heap. Why has it not happened? 49 years have gone by. At last I can tell you that it is, all the pieces are falling into place now, all of a sudden. Well, in Europe, there are many nations. They speak different languages. They're divided by various languages. They're divided by different national aspirations and national patriotisms, and by different currencies. They have the German mark, the French franc, the English pound, and the lira in Italy, and the peso or whatever it is in Spain. They have different kind of currency, different kind of money. Now they have gotten together in an economic system. That's been going on now for a good many years. The EEC, or the European Economic Community. But that is only something that knocks down tariff barriers for international trade among the nations of Europe. Well, what they want is political union. What they want is one military force. What they want is one great world power. And actually, they're right on the borderline of the Soviet Union.
So that's, he went on to talk about, okay, yeah, I've been saying this is going to happen for years, and they've got this economic union, they want political union, they want military union, they've not been able to make it happen. Why? And he talks about in that message, well, it's going to require the Catholic Church. And it's going to require some kind of binding force that will overcome all of these national disagreements that he just talked about. And that is what it's going to take to bring this together. So that's something to keep watching in the news. All of these, say, smaller stories from Europe this week, I think, point to the rise of this power. And they point to how fast this power could rise and will rise. But that is one of the key missing ingredients to still watch for. But you're going to see, and there are so many prophecies in the Bible that talk about the rise of this European power. And as you heard from Mihailo, it's going to play a massive role in the Middle East. It's going to, the Bible even talks about it working with China against the United States in a trade war. You can see world events building to this. Our free book, The Holy Roman Empire in Prophecy, that takes you through more of that and helps you and helps explain and show why we're watching for this European power and why Mr. Armstrong made those forecasts. I mean, another thing that's going to play a very important role is the rise of a strongman in Germany, and keep watching the German elections. We've had quite a bit of election news in Germany this week, where the Christian Democratic Union, the party that's favorite to win in the elections, they tried to get an anti-immigration vote through by aligning with the Alternative for Deutschland, and they failed. They didn't quite manage to get enough to have a majority in the German parliament. But what I thought was pretty significant about that is you look at the polls that have come out towards the end of this week. After that, they haven't been punished by voters for working with the Alternative for Deutschland. There was a lot of pearl clutching at the time from people in German politics saying, well, how could you work with these people? They're Nazis, they're et cetera, et cetera. And I think, yeah, there's some truth to that. I've talked about the AfD before. They have some of their leaders have very radical beliefs. But the CDU weren't punished by, at least in the opinion polls, by doing that. So I think we are entering a new era in German politics where new coalitions are possible that might not have been possible before. So watch for the rise of a strong German leader. I wouldn't just play quickly. We've got a quote from a Key of David that trumpet editor-in-chief Gerald Fleury gave just a little bit ago. And he talked about that you could watch these elections, you could see a strong leader within Germany emerge very quickly. You can play clip 7, George.
The collapse of Germany's government will lead to a dramatic change for Germany and Europe and the whole world. There's going to be a strong leader that comes on the scene to lead this European Union, which will become the Holy Roman Empire with 10 kings, and he will rule over all of them. That is the Bible prophecy that we need to understand. And I think that could happen in just weeks, certainly in a few months.
So that's something else that could be transformational and will play an important role in transforming Europe into this much more militarily powerful Holy Roman Empire. So keep watching those elections. Watch in particular the coalition negotiations that will inevitably come afterwards, and watch for a strong man to take advantage of those to come to power in Germany and to transform all of Europe. That is also something absolutely critical to watch. Now, at this point, normally I would turn over to Jeremiah Jacques in the United States, who covers Asia. He has not shown up today. He had some kind of lame excuse about his wife having a baby or something. He had something more important to do, quite clearly, than being on the show. No, we are very excited for him and offer him our hearty congratulations and hope all of that goes well. But it means that we are denied the pleasure of his presence on the show today. So I'll just give you a quick rundown of some European stories. I had like a 5-10 minute segment prepared on China's Sputnik moment. I'm just going to cover this really quickly. One thing that just caught my eye, we talked about this DeepSeek last week, this new Chinese AI company that ended up wiping trillions off NVIDIA's stock price. NVIDIA's stock price has recovered slightly, in case anyone is worried about that, because, as isn't too surprising, DeepSeek, I think, is still very remarkable, but not quite as remarkable as it looked kind of the day after you had the big launch of their model. And the big story was, wow, they've made this amazing AI that doesn't need NVIDIA's most advanced chips because they're banned from China. Turns out they may well have been smuggling in NVIDIA's most advanced chips. So I think it's still very impressive, perhaps not as impressive as initially seemed. Again, that's not surprising. But one of Donald Trump's advisors, Mark Andreessen, I mentioned him last time. I think he founded Netscape Navigator. I remember that from when I was a kid. But he said DeepSeek R1 is AI's Sputnik moment. And there's another bit of a kind of Sputnik moment that we've gotten. Sputnik moment, of course, Russia launched the Sputnik, the satellite, and kind of America is a big wake-up call to America. Oh, we kind of accept it as default that we are the most technologically advanced nation on Earth. We might not be. And you've got this with DeepSeek, but also there have been some satellite photos of what looks like a fusion research center in China. Mianyang, Jeremiah would have pronounced it way better than that, is where this is meant to be. There's photos showing a big X-shaped building. They think this is a very highly advanced. It's 50% bigger than California's Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. To not just to catch up with America on fusion, but overtake America on fusion. And fusion. Well, the joke is that fusion is the technology of the future and always will be. But this is a massive advance in energy generation. If we can get it working, get to the point you can get more energy out of it than putting into it on a sustained, long-lasting level. This is a key to cheap, abundant electricity and energy. And China is raking a real bid to overtake the United States. So I think this is an interesting story and one worth watching. And we talk on this show, we kind of have a lot of the social problems in the United States. And we'll talk about problems in American education and Hamas indoctrinating US schools and schools going woke. And this is the result. You start to get overtaken by other countries in areas of critical technology and security. And you can no longer take for granted that you are the most advanced. So I think that is an important story to watch. And Andrew mentioned passages in the Bible in Deuteronomy 28, Leviticus 23 that talk about blessings and cursings. And God's law is a law of cause and effect. And so you move away from that and it causes curses. And you have problems in your education system and you fall behind. And I make this point quite a bit on this show, that this is not some kind of morally neutral competition. I know academically people try to make it sound like, well, United States, China, they're all basically the same. And we mustn't be biased and we must talk about them the same. They are not. They are fundamentally not. I'm not American. There are things that I'm very quick to point out that I think are mistakes America's made or evil that America's done. I think they've sheltered IRA terrorists going back into the 90s. I think that was a terrible thing to do. Moral influence. America has a catastrophic moral influence. Britain is no better in a moral influence. I'm not trying to say that Britain is free of blame there, but you look at just the role of Hollywood, the American music industry, the effect that America's way of doing the internet has normalized pornography. There's a lot of moral evils coming out there. But in terms of the way that China has 2 million people in concentration camps, you don't have anything like that in the United States. There is an evil character of that regime that is different from the United States. And so when you see them taking over leadership and technology and in places around the world, that is a dangerous sign for the whole world. And of course, it's not just China. One of our stories this week revolves around Russia, where there was a story about an alarming rise of the number of Ukrainian prisoners of war being executed. So this was from the United Nations Human Rights Monitoring Mission. They documented 79 executions of captured uranium. Thankfully, there aren't any uranium soldiers going around. Captured Ukrainian soldiers. So this is the norms of war going out of the picture, cruel treatment there. I have another story on our website. Russia is winning the race for the Arctic. These powers are gaining, and they have a very different view of the world to the United States. And we have another booklet, Russia and China in Prophecy. If you're interested in learning more about these powers and what's going on there, Russia and China in Prophecy is a great place to look. Well, that's a quick blitz through that news story. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us. We've been really grateful to have you with us. I'll also just mention, we're talking about Donald Trump's announcements. Over the weekend, last weekend, just over a week ago, he was also talking about South Africa and a lot of the evils going on there in South Africa's land reform, property reform, where they're coming along and passing a law that allows themselves to help themselves to personal property. That was our Wednesday show. We had the opportunity to interview the head of PR from AfriForum, and Ernst. And Ernst was fantastic, great guy to talk to. It was, I think, one of our best interviews. And so, if you want to go and learn more about that, just look on our YouTube page, our Rumble page, and it's one of our shorter shows. We didn't go overtime like we did today, and you can see that there. I'll also point. And then I mentioned at this point last time that we'd probably do our interview with Trumpet Assistant Managing Editor Philip Nice and talk about the latest Trumpet print. We didn't do that this week. We probably will do that this week coming up. So that'll go up on Wednesday. Thank you very much to George Haddad and Isaac Lorenz for engineering and production. Thank you so much for joining us. You can email the show, trumpetworld@thetrumpet.com. We'd be very happy to hear from you. Please do like, subscribe, help us spread this message out. You can go to the Trumpet website, thetrumpet.com, to order any of the material that we have offered on this show and a great many other bits of material. But we'll be back on Wednesday, and until then, keep watching your world.